here. Cool. All right, so let's wait for, let's get the slides started. Cool. Yeah, thank you all for coming down early Saturday morning. I know it's Saturday morning. It seems like we started a little bit early, but anyway. Do we have the slides up? Cool. All right, maybe before we get started, how many people have done something in the Bitcoin space? Just show of hands. Okay. Ethereum space. Okay, cool. So we have quite a lot of Ethereum developers. All right. Has anybody heard of DeFiChain before the event? Anybody? Show of hands. Cool. Okay. So maybe we'll walk away with something new. Oh. All right. So that's our DeFiChain Labs team raising their hands enthusiastically. Thank you. Cool. All right. So before we get into DeFiChain, go a little bit about what it is, a little bit about me. Well, yeah, it helps to kind of some context on who is it that's in front of you blabbing about. I'm Prasanna. I've been building blockchain since 2019. That's actually not a long time, but in the Web3 for time horizon, I think that's a pretty long time. Anybody been in the blockchain space a lot before? Show of hands. Oh, cool. All right. So yeah, come find me. Love to talk to you. All right. So currently, I lead the OSS blockchain engineering at the Cake Group. Cake Group is one of the key contributors to DeFiChain. And before that, I was at Google. So I used to lead the compute infra team at EMEA. And so it's been a bit of an interesting shift. So you see pretty much the pinnacle of Web2 infrastructure, and then from there pivot into Web3. And then before that, yeah, very passionate about open source. Been doing a lot of that there. Anybody here into Rust? Any Rust stations here? Oh, cool. All right, we see quite a few. Yeah, so I used to be a part of the early async working group back when Rust wasn't as mainstream. And but now, I'm still a Rust station, and our team actually builds. DeFiChain was a fork of Bitcoin. We'll cover that a little bit more. But C++ code base, and then we also managed to get a good chunk of the whole EVM that we built is all in Rust. So it's kind of you're getting all that together. Before that, I was part of the VC world a little bit, helping a lot of startups in India before that. So it's a bit about me, and then let's get into DeFiChain. What it actually is unlike most of the chains are usually UTXO based or it's EVM based. DeFiChain, it's a little bit more trickier to explain. So the core of it is a UTXO based blockchain. It was a fork of Bitcoin in 2019, and intentionally so it is non-Turing complete. Right, so Bitcoin at the end of the day, it's a ledger, right? So there are a couple of things that you can do, but it's limited programmability. There's only so much you can do, and which is by design. And then DVM is essentially what DeFiChain adds on top. And this is a layer that it's got limited programmability by design. What that means is it essentially builds out native foundational blocks of DeFi. Blocks that look like, so there's a DEX, decentralized exchange, that's a part of the chain itself. So unlike on EVM land where you have projects like Uniswap, Balancer, like so many other aspects to it, but at the end of the day, the projects can stop, right? The projects can have different control over things, but here in DeFiChain, it's actually governed by the chain consensus itself. So as long as the chain is sticking, the DEX is always available. So DEX, and then you also have atomic swap, which is currently it supports Bitcoin. So like without any other parties, directly with Bitcoin, you can interact and then do atomic swaps. And then governance and a whole bunch more. We'll touch on a little bit of that later. So that's essentially DeFiChain VM. And then comes EVM. So DeFiChain VM, by design, you don't really have much to do. Right? If it is there as a part of consensus, you can use it. So yeah, by design, you can't really do much. But if it works, it just works. Right? So there's no smart contracts, there's no vulnerabilities to think about because it's all already a part of the chain itself. So then with EVM, it's intentionally Turing complete, so which basically opens up for developers to start building, because at the end of the day, that's kind of programmable money, right? So programmable finance, that's kind of what's exciting about it. That's the whole, I hope that's kind of the reason that, a good bunch of people are here, because that's a greenfield. It's something new where it's not completely been explored before. So we'll get into a little bit of more of these as we go. But yeah, EVM was actually just launched on mainnet last week. It's been there for a couple of months on testnet for a while. And now EVM, the way it also works is it has 100% compatibility with Ethereum. What that means is ETS and RPCs are completely supported. The programming models are going to be exactly the same as Ethereum, right? So you can pretty much just switch the network and then everything should work exactly the same way. So, and then next on our list is actually Watson. But that's coming up next year. Touch on a little bit of that more. The whole idea is, yeah, EVM kind of provides you with a sudden model, but it's also a legacy model. Wasm is kind of the next generation of things. Right? How many people are aware of Wasm here? WebAssembly? Okay. Do you know if any of you have used Wasm? Has anybody used Chrome? Okay. Yeah. As long as you've used Chrome, pretty much everybody has used Wasm. So WebAssembly is the underlying, JavaScript evolved into the next generation of web that's powering many of the things. It's a really evolving story, but now it's also coming more into the blockchain space because it's one of the most secure engines and portable engines that's available with the sandbox model. Anyway, just going into DeFi Chain again, just some basics on it. There's about 17,000 validators across the globe, so it's fairly decentralized. It's quite a lot. And then TVL, close to about, this was just yesterday, about $500 million approximately, but crypto volatility, so it keeps going back and forth. I think at the peak point it was somewhere close to 2.2 or 2.5 billion, something like that. But the graphs on the side are essentially, that's the TVL, not in terms of the value of it, but then, just the total amount of capital that's been locked, so it's been slowly increasing throughout the year, and then below is the addresses. So it's with EVM, we expect actually development activity. So far, there's been not a lot of development activity. It's just people who use native DeFi blocks. Right, so that's kind of a little bit of basics, and then DeFi Chain has also in terms of developer activities, consistently been one of the top 10 over the last 2 years. It's varied around, but based on crypto volatility and whatnot. But yeah, team has been really hard at work, popping out quite a few things. All right, so then just coming to the ecosystem, early on there was really nothing to develop. So it was quite a few exchanges, and then, so I do want to touch on a few things which are prominent here, which is Cake. The founders of Cake are the ones who wrote the initial white paper for DeFi Chain. And the relationship, it actually had quite an interesting relationship where with Cake, it was about providing things in a transparent manner to the user. It's kind of ironic, pretty much most of the hacks that we see in Web3 space or exchanges, many of the things that happen, Web3 is supposed to be decentralized and then operate with less trust because the consensus of the chain provides more. But then most of the issues happen with, be it FTX or many of the other issues, they're all centralized exchanges, right? Where it's an open model, transparency is supposed to be encouraged, but then at the end of the day, as ironic as it sounds, these are all closed boxes, right? Which is where most of these happen. So with Cake, the philosophy was, hey, we want to do all that in an open way. So the chain acted as a vehicle in many manners. So every product that Cake offered was backed by the chain itself. So people can go transparently look at, okay, what is actually happening? And so that's kind of how it was built. And then Birthday Research was Cake's open source arm, which was contributing heavily to the chain, building out the native DeFi layer. And then a couple of others of the exchanges. And below there's quite a lot of, as EVM is coming out, there are more and more in the ecosystem. There's quite a lot more with EVM, but just wanted to touch on a few things as to how the ecosystem sort of looks like. Now, getting a little bit under the hood, So DeFi Chain, the average block time is usually something like 30 seconds. The block is very similar to Bitcoin because it's at its core it is UTXO. Bitcoin has roughly approximately about 10 minutes, but this operates at 30 seconds. And then the current consensus is it's proof of stake, but it's a hybrid POW POS model, so it kind of closely relates to Bitcoin, but it's not energy intensive as Bitcoin, because it is a POS model. There's going to be likely upgrades to that the coming year to also reduce block times with now bringing in developers. So now that there's actual programmability around it, so experience has to be better. So there are a couple of things that the team's working on, but it's all going to be slowly growing. It's not there right now. So then a couple of other things. It has 100% compatibility with Bitcoin, both the protocol as well as the API. What this means is the chain can actually just talk to the Bitcoin network. So it can receive Bitcoin blocks and it can validate them as is, which is not something that a lot of chains can do. And then at the same time, it is now, as of last week, also 100% compatible with EVM, which means it brings in the programmability of EVM, so you can actually develop things there. The overarching story is now with actually accessing Bitcoin and EVM at the same block. What are the other exciting things that people can start to do? Right? That's the new exciting story that chapter that we're actually getting into. And then, last but not the least, it also anchors back to Bitcoin. So at this stage, I think every couple of blocks, there's usually anchors. So there's an incentive model for people who want to make sure that they anchor. But yeah, pretty much most of the blocks ends up being anchored to Bitcoin as well. So it's a little bit under the hood, but zooming back out, just sort of back to roots as to why it's designed the way it is. Right, so India is a predominantly digital economy, but does anybody here still like cash? They're like, hey, cash is king. Wow, nobody prefers cash whatsoever. Wow, okay, that's interesting. Maybe a little bit of a small anecdote would help. Singapore, again, is it is one of the most well-developed infrastructures in completely digital economy. About a month ago, a couple of large banks went down for about 3 to 4 hours. Right, so, and Singapore is a place where I moved to Singapore about 1.5 years ago, have not withdrawn a single Singapore dollar. I just never did, because it's a cashless economy, right? So it's that amount of high confidence, but then for about 3 to 4 hours, I don't know the exact amount of time, but pretty much everything just shut down. So, which means, like if you're at a stand, like if you're paying for your food, like that's it, you just can't. The people who are actually able to go forward is the people with cash, right? Doesn't mean, like we shouldn't all be developing for an apocalyptic scenario. That's not productive. But at the end of the day, that still happens, right? So maybe that's like the less than 10% use case. But what's interesting about it is cash model gives you something very unique, which is as long as you hold it, that is yours. Right? So in digital economy, you're holding, so your bank is holding what is yours. If something happens to that or you don't have access to it, you actually lose that. Right? But the cash model is, hey, if I'm having it with me, I can use it. Right? Which is pretty unique. And how do you model cash in the same digital world? It's kind of something, like how do you do cash? If you have $100 and you want to spend 99 for, I don't know, samosa here, right? So go give your 100, and then you get a 1 back, right? Now that 1 is yours, right? But it's not some ledger that's just being tweaked. You physically hold it in some manner. So if you model that in a digital world, it looks pretty much exactly like that. Like the recipient gets the 99, and then the rest of the 1 comes back to you. This is essentially what Bitcoin does, right? So Bitcoin is even still one of the very few chains that models the current cash economy very, very well. Right? Ethereum, we'll get into that, but at the end of the day, that's essentially why UTXOs are quite powerful. Right? So this model is essentially what's called UTXOs, just essentially standing for unspent transaction outputs, which is what you get. So that's UTXO. Now, just zooming out a little bit more, it's most of the crypto space, usually the largest market cap units, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Bitcoin is a UTXO-based system, and then account-based, Ethereum is one of the most prominent ones that people know about, but then most of the other ones, Solana is account-based as well. UTXO, there are like quite a few that does UTXO as well, but usually UTXO, again, the problem is programmability, because you're always giving something back, then how do you program that becomes a little bit more complex, right? So, but there's also something more interesting about the UTXO model, which is, now looking at all this, if you zoom a little bit more and then see, hey, how does this actually work, is essentially you're holding the key to something that's on the chain, right? So you can actually see the chain as a series of vaults, right? It's a vault on the cloud. It's technically not on the cloud, it's a peer-to-peer network. It's decentralized, but at the end of the day, you're not actually holding that data, right? That data is on the chain, but it's locked, and what you have is the key. You have the key to unlock it, right? So this is essentially the principle with which pretty much all Bitcoin, Ethereum, everything is built, right? However, the interesting thing is, if you start digging in a little bit more, you add smart contracts into it. This is the expectation. So the expectation is you hold the key, only you can unlock it. But in practice, once you add smart contracts, what it starts looking like is it's a shared vault. Your security is only as good as the weakest chain of that smart contract. Right? So the moment you move your money into that smart contract, it's now the weakest link is basically how that smart contract is programmed. Right? So which is, I think even last week, there was a Kyber network vulnerability. How many folks read about that? Oh, cool. At least somebody is familiar. Cool. So these are things, I mean, I think this has happened so many times that almost every month you see something popping up. Right? So again, we are just completely zooming out as a whole. We are pretty much still in that early curve of overall adoption. So these are things that are expected to happen, flush itself out. But still, from a user point of view, like, hey, is a smart contract safe enough for me to put money in? Do I want to participate? So these are all questions. These are all complicated questions, right? Which is not actually easy to answer unless you've been following it very, very closely. Even as a developer people here are fairly, you understand things more. But even for you, like, if I were to look at a smart contract, like, unless I understand a lot more, it's like, I just don't want to, usually we use proxy as a replication to that, right? But again, that doesn't really tell you much at all. So in practice, that's kind of what it ends up as, which is where now coming back to UTXO, it's actually very powerful. Because now that UTXO part ensures that as long as you hold it, that's it. You're the only one who can use it. It ensures that security, it brings back that cash model, right? So now coming back to, okay, why is this all relevant? Why am I talking about all of this? So the DeFi chain architecture is UTXOs are essentially a separate island. So the chain works at its core with UTXOs, and basically every single block, most of the items are UTXOs. So if you're a user who just wants to participate in the chain, who just wants to move money around, you can just use that. And you're not exposed, you're not vulnerable to anything else that's going on in the chain. Now DVM is the DeFi Chain VM, which essentially what it does is it provides a couple of basic blocks that we talked about, the DEX, there's a governance layer on top, and a whole bunch of things. And then you have EVM, so which is, currently it's architected as an XVM infrastructure, so the whole point is EVM is just one piece of the puzzle. Now we can actually start adding more. WASM is one of that part of the story, right? So how I would imagine it is, these are all different islands that are floating around. There is no access between these except for one part of the protocol, which is called transfer domain, right? So you can just think of it as, these are all islands, and then your transfer domain is the boat, right? So, and this is a very intentional boat, which the user intentionally has to go and pick. So if a user wants to participate in EVM, so then the user moves from DVM using transfer domain their funds into an EVM address. On the same, it's all of it happening in the same network, but once they move it, they have access to all the smart contracts, participate in the exact same manner, as it works on Ethereum, right? So that's kind of just a high-level basics of how all of these works. And then just going in a little bit more detail, yeah, UTXO, I mean, send. You can still do a couple of more things with Bitcoin 6 script. There's a little bit of programmability, but it's not Turing complete. Then DVM, it has, the key things that it has is it has a token system, which is established. So any token definition, unlike Ethereum where it's again another smart contract, here it's actually well defined, which means you can use that to participate in all aspects of the system, because all the other modular parts know about how a token is defined and how it's supposed to behave. Then there's a DEX, which sits on top of that. So, and then you have governance. So Web3 governance is a whole different story, but I won't get into it, but basically governance is used to control everything else. So the chain now currently has 70,000 masternodes, so if there's a larger change, masternodes can vote on it. Again, CFPs is what is called, it's essentially a community fund, so which people, as you all are, if you're building interesting projects, beyond the hackathon, something you want to dive deeper, so there's a huge community fund as well, where you can just put your proposal in, masternodes vote, and then if based on how much that you want to start for funding your projects, so these kind of mechanisms are there as a part of the governance. There's going to be increasingly more added to it. And then there are a couple of more other things as well, which is atomic swaps, and then there's also CDP mechanisms, which are part of it currently. And then there's quite a few more. There's also currently an Oracle mechanism. May or may not move to EVM now that we have it, but it has quite a few things. And then comes EVM. So EVM, I mean, I don't have to talk about it. I think that's what predominantly most of the room here it has quite a lot of experience in. So, but how are these things going to be exposed into EVM? Essentially, the token system is represented. You can't modify the state of DVM or UTXO from anything in the XVM infrastructure. However, you can read this state. So if you have some tokens here, then it is something that's going to be exposed there. So as long as the user moves there, then you have visibility for that in your contracts. And using that, you can build contracts. And these contracts, the eventual goal is they can also take advantage of the DVM aspects, which is something now is always going to be available. It's not like some contract or something somebody else has control over, which can just be paused or anything on those lines. So these are, as long as the chain is ticking, all of these functionality is going to work. So you can depend on that and then build your contracts based on that. So this is the basic high-level detail. Now this is a hackathon, so just dig a little bit more into how a DVM block is going to look like. So basically a block, you're going to have UTXO or account transactions. And then you're going to have XVM, which is basically the EVM transaction. Everything is going to be interspersed into the same block. So it's going to look like a Bitcoin block, but these transactions can be Bitcoin-based transactions, it can be Ethereum-based transactions, or potentially in the future something else as well. So there's as you dig into it, you could find out the details about the technicals on how these are all implemented. But long story short, anything related to BTC goes through BTC validation pipeline. Anything related to XVM, so in the particular case of EVM, the EVM is a module inside XVM, so it goes through its own signature validation. And the way EVM is still 100% compatible with all the tools out there is it exposes a synthetic EVM block. That's not a different block, but it's just a view where it's a block with all just the EVM transactions from here. So we did that so that every other existing tool can just consume it without any change. Otherwise, every tool will start reading all the BTC transactions and like, hey, I don't understand this, right? So this is kind of the larger architecture things. And then they get a bit more into fees. Again, it's going to be very similar to the block model where UTXO DVM miner usually gets its fees as UTXO. EVM land, again, we just so that everybody has the same familiarity, same compatibility. It's going to follow EIP 1.59. So it's going to be very similar to if you're working in Ethereum land, you should feel home. If not, it's probably a bug. You might have to just reach out to the team. So that's digging a little bit deeper. Now, just to kind of give you it's not a deep tech talk, so I won't go into the details of it, but happy to chat later. Now, just to kind of have a larger outlook on what the journey was, the early part was building that native DeFi. which are the foundational blocks, and then EVM, that's where we are now. And then the next part of this journey is going to be cross-chain protocol. Why the cross-chain protocol is interesting here is, let's go to the next one. Yeah, so DeFi Chain is, what's unique about it is, it's basically, it speaks 100% Bitcoin protocol while doing all of this. And what this also means is, we can actually just talk to Bitcoin. We can validate the Bitcoin network. We can just do peering with Bitcoin, right? So now what we have on the other side is, we have the Ethereum protocol, which we started supporting now. And then all the tools can consume the EVM-related JSON RPCs or WebSockets, whatever, right? So that's something that it can do on the other side. So with the cross protocol, the place that we're heading to next is, this part talks directly to Bitcoin. This still is even now possible, but it's through atomic swap. It's not directly talking to the Bitcoin network, but you can still actually swap things using atomic swap, which is an SPV. The chain doesn't directly talk, but yeah, it uses an SPV to talk. But eventually, the chain is just directly going to do that. That's part of the larger roadmap for next year. And on the other side, now that we understand EVM, we can basically just connect into the Ethereum protocol as well. Doing this lets us do something. So far, it's just been setting up all the architecture for this and getting us ready to go. And now, the future, one of the cool things that we can do post this is everything is just going to run as a sharded network. So part of DeFi Chain runs with Bitcoin, part of DeFi Chain runs with Ethereum. And Polkadot and Solana haven't currently planned through yet, but because of once we sort out the sharding part, it's essentially the same architecture. So one of the things that we can do is, you can now take something from the Bitcoin land, move it straight up into something else without bridges, without actually some centralized part of that. The irony of the Web3 world is, at the end of the day, everything based on decentralization, right? But if you have a couple of Bitcoins, and then you want to swap it into Ethereum, where do you go today? Anybody want to answer that? It's yes. Almost always you go to a centralized exchange, right? That's kind of the irony of the Web3 world. So now what this enables is, there are a couple of decentralized bridges, but bridges are always pretty much the Achilles heel in Web3. That's where most of the hacks happen. That's very complex to figure out trustless bridges. There are centralized bridges that's there, but then more often than not, everybody just goes through exchanges. Now here, the chain itself takes over the responsibility of being that bridge, because the chain can talk to both the networks. This is usually complex because what is the source of truth in a decentralized world is always very difficult to determine, right? So if you want to talk to the Bitcoin network, what is the source of truth in the Bitcoin network, right? So because it's supposed to be a decentralized network. So it's a hard problem to solve, but the closest you can get to the truth is talking to the network directly, which is basically what DeFi Chain does. And now, same thing with Ethereum, right? So which is something that we are adding that functionality now. So the eventual goal is, this becomes that bridge layer through which you can, for instance, you have, on the Bitcoin space, you have ordinals, right? So, or there's BRC20s, and there's a interesting token dynamic that's going on in the Bitcoin land. You can take that, just move it straight into, let's say, Uniswap or Index on Ethereum without going through other parties. Right? So this is kind of the exciting future. We're not there yet, but part of it is there. Part of the architecture is there, but that's the larger part of the next year's journey. Right? So hopefully this gives you some idea on what is this about, and then why it might be interesting to build on something like this. Yep. So just to again, this is not a tech talk, so I'm just touching up on the basics. So what's next is, first things first. Now that with EVM launched, we're hoping that people like you start building the apps. Quite a few out there, but now is because it's early, just launched last week. So which means there's also immense opportunity for utilizing community funds, lots of incentives out there to build some of the more standard liquidity models that's there. So hoping that that's something there's a lot of energy around it. And then block time improvements, that is something for our overall user experience. That has to be better. So that's a part of a key priority next year. And then state relating improvements. What I mean by state layer is talking between these domains. Right? So EVM layer having more access to understand the state of, okay, what is actually there on VVM. Let's say what amount of UTXOs you have in a particular address. So these are all useful from an EVM land to understand. So then you can make that programmable as well. So those are a couple of things that's going to be improving. For now, there's actually a contract that operates as an oracle that will give you some amount of that data. But not all kinds of data is possible to get that in a reliable way per block. But yeah, so that's going to be it's a transitory phase, and then we'll be moving forward to that. Then the next is the big one, which is going to be the WASM engine. But WASM engine, what it's going to let you do is you don't just have to use Solidity or any other Web3 specific language anymore, because it's essentially what the browser engine is built on. You can, if you're familiar with TypeScript, you can use TypeScript. If you're familiar with Python, you can use Python. If you want to use C, C++, you're welcome to do so. Right? So you can pretty much build it on anything and then just use your existing programming model. So you're not restricted to the model that Solidity kind of inherited. Solidity is kind of the JavaScript of the blockchain world. Right? So it's hacking in some ways, but as a modern standard, it's not something like we want to continue pushing forward. So WASM is something that'll give massive amount of capability plus performance as well. So that's the next big chunk, and then XCM, which is the cross-masking protocol to allow multiple chains and these sharded networks, which is us talking directly to BTC. Yeah, so these are some of the large things that are on the roadmap for the next years. Yep, and that's essentially it. Hopefully, I'm able to give you some idea as to what it is. But yeah, thank you all. Appreciate you all coming down here. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day. I think there's a couple of fun panels, and then there's going to be a little bit of a demo on how do you actually code, how do you connect to EVM, all of that. But yeah, enjoy, have fun for the rest of the day. Thank you.
GM folks, hope you enjoyed that super insightful keynote by Prasanna. I'll just go ahead and give you all a quick run through of what do we have for today. One sec. So we started accepting applications about like one and a half week ago, and we already had over 400 applications, so that's pretty cool. We're aiming for about like 700 to 1,000 applications by the end. And to give you all a gist of how the hackathon is going to go, it's a 10-day hackathon. We're doing the kickoff today, obviously, and then this will go on online for about 8 days. Feel free to join the Telegram group if you all haven't already. We'll be directly communicating over there with all the updates, everything that's sort of coming up. And also, obviously, follow DeFi Chain on Twitter for like further updates. But yeah, we're going to go online for 8 days, and then we're again going to meet for like a blast of a session where we'll be announcing the grand winners of the hackathon along with the rest of the tracks. So yeah, 400 applications so far, and that's how the hackathon is going to go. To give you all just a quick overview of how the day is looking like, after I've sort of just gone over the hackathon, we'll have Veer come and introduce the tracks. We'll go for lunch, and then we have a dev session by Shoham and Swarnabha, the core blockchain engineer and developer DevRel from DeFi Chain Labs, followed by a kickoff for the hackathon itself. Then we have like an ideation hacking time. Y'all can like roam around, y'all can like ideate on ideas, y'all can go to Shoham, Swarnabha, Prasanna, and if you all have any questions about how to build on DeFi Chain, feel free to go to them. And then we have a fireside chat with some of the big brain DeFi Web3 folks from India. And then we close with networking and snacks, and bid goodbye and farewell until we meet again on the 5th. And yeah, I pass it over to Veer from DeFi Chain Labs to go over the tracks and prices for you.
All right, back again, guys. So for the price pool, so in overall we have about 25K USD in prizes, which is distributed across different price tracks. And apart from just the prizes, for anyone who actually builds a project, you have 5K sponsored in AWS credits. So you don't have to worry about actually spinning up your project too. So let me just dive deeper into what the tracks are and the different prizes involved in it. So first up, the grand prize track. Now this is for the best projects that come out of the hackathon. So the best project itself has 4K in USD, and then you have runner-up and second runner-up. So these would just be across the prize tracks too, for overall, like whichever projects our judges deem were the most innovative or the most groundbreaking on DeFi Chain. And so hopefully one of you guys do win that. Post that, now I'm going to go through the individual price tracks that we have. So even if, let's say, the grand pricing is a bit more challenging, there are a lot of different niches that you can actually participate in. So starting off, we have the cross-chain integration prize. So like Prasanna was talking about, right? The future, not only for DeFi Chain, but across Web3 is going to be cross-chain and interoperability. We know that, and as an industry, for it to actually evolve, cross-chain is the future. So it'll be really interesting to see where you guys can take maybe cross-chain solutions. So we have two different tracks for it. First is Bridge Builder, which is about how you can maybe use a solution which leverages bridge mechanics on DeFi Chain for cross-chain integration. And the second one is Innovative Asset Transfer. I know that sounds a bit vague, but what it basically means is bridges are the current way, or exchanges are the current way for people to move liquidity across chains, right? So is there a different way that you can think of which doesn't exist at this point for people to actually move their funds, similar to like how we built the EVM layer, which now allows you to move from DeFi Chain's DVM to EVM. So that's the first track. Then privacy and security. For those of you who are super plugged into Web3 and crypto, so we know privacy has become a major, major factor and a way to try and address some of the concerns people have had for security, right? With ZK rollups being one of the biggest topics, especially even Polygon has been exploring it with their CDK solution. So privacy and security is something that is a big blocker for the masses to adopt crypto, right? So how could we actually move that forward? So we've got two separate tracks here with a total of 2K for it, where if you think privacy, like zero knowledge, is a way forward and that's something that you're interested in, that's a track for you. Or security, if you feel like there's a way that you can actually bring a more secure solution to DeFi Chain, be it for asset transfers, be it through dApps, protocols, whatever you feel like. That could be the track for you. Then we have a track which personally is my favorite, the ecosystem expansion one, where it's just about bringing in different ideas on what sort of projects or protocols that you would want to deploy on the DeFi Chain EVM layer. So a real-world solution is more about like how could you actually bring RWA or real-world assets onto a native crypto chain, right? What are the different ways that could make it useful? People have been exploring, trying to connect the two worlds for a long time, right? So if that's something that really interests you, that's the track for you. Wallet Wizard is more about innovative wallet solutions. Now we've seen there's so many wallets. There are native wallets on DeFi Chain, there are native wallets on nearly every chain out there, right? But there's still a huge problem in terms of user experience, user functionality. How could you improve that, right? So if you think you have a lot of ideas about how to improve the onboarding and wallet experience, maybe that's the one. And finally, innovative use case is regardless of specific niches, but if you have an idea for a project that you really feel brings innovation to the crypto space, then this is definitely the track for you. The penultimate track, so AI is definitely something that people have been talking about a lot these days. It's all the rage, especially with like the different LLMs popping up here and there. People have been trying different ways of actually bringing this even into the crypto space. Many even argue that maybe the way for AI to actually scale from even like a decentralized perspective might be the way forward, given the computing cost for all of these LLM models out there, right? So if you think AI is actually something that could be solved in terms of scaling, in terms of computing, in terms of any of it, then these two tracks would actually be the way forward for you. The first one is just purely about how you might want to leverage AI in a crypto solution. And the second one is how it could actually benefit something, maybe other protocols that actually exist. How could they leverage AI itself? And finally, a sort of twist on our price tracks. The last price track is the DFI price track. So DeFi Chain's native token is DFI. And so this price track is all about people who want to see how they can take what Prasanna was talking about and spin that further out, see what different solutions you can maybe do with DeFi Chain. So there's a couple of different ways that you can actually take it. And this price track gives each person 10K of DFI each. So what the different price tracks are, the DFI Pioneer is all about like innovative use cases with DFI. How else could it be used? And where else could you take it? The RWA one is similar to the DApp ecosystem expansion, but this is about a focus on DeFi Chain. So if you wanted to bring real world assets, right? It may be lending protocols. How would you actually integrate that onto DeFi Chain? And given the unique functionality that you have across the different layers, why would RWA be a use case here? And finally, the last one is, like Prasanna mentioned, we have a lot of projects building, both decentralized, we have partnerships with a lot of exchanges out there. So there's a lot of in the ecosystem that is already building. What do you think could you actually do to innovate what exists in this ecosystem? Is there something that you could build that could actually bring this all together? Or is there something that, a protocol that people would want to use, like maybe liquid staking, stuff like that? So this price track would be for someone who really wants to see how they could like innovate the ecosystem itself. And I think, yeah, like I mentioned, all projects will receive 5,000 in AWS credits. So once you get started, you don't really have to worry about maintenance costs of spinning off your project. That's all covered by us. So, and if you do have any questions or anything at all, like I said in the beginning, you can raise it in our Discord. But the best thing for you to do to get started would be like scanning that QR code and registering on DevHack if you haven't already. And after that, just drop any questions you have in the Discord. One of our team members will be more than happy to help you guys out. I'm very excited to see what tracks people go into and what projects come out of it. All right, I think that's about it for the first session, right? Do we have anything? Do we have lunch now? Yeah. All right, so we're gonna have a short lunch break, and then after that, like I mentioned, we're gonna have a workshop just to get you guys started on DeFi Chain. So make sure you guys have your laptops ready after lunch, and then we can actually get this hackathon started, yeah? All right, thanks guys.
Yes, there's one sugar, there's good, and